Welcome to 3 Lanes number 8. We made it to the 8th episode, and this time around, we're going to be discussing the Volkswagen Beetle. Like it was previously announced, uh, we are talking about the Volkswagen Beetle, and this one specifically is dedicated to Jorge. He needs to sell me that Beetle that he has parked outside his house. He knows he's not touching it, he needs to get rid of it, and the perfect buyer, it's myself. Let's begin. The Volkswagen Beetle had a lifespan of 80 years from 1938 to 2019. This car definitely has an interesting story, just like how it was commissioned and who it was commissioned to. Its history is complex, and nobody gets out of story without a little bit of sin, and the Beetle is no strange to that. The original conception, the Beetle origins trace back to the early 30s in Nazi Germany. Hitler commissioned a car, the Beetle, obviously, to none other than Ferdinand Porsche to design the people's car. Like we spoke on the GTI episode, uh, people's car equals Volkswagen in German. It was a car that was supposed to be affordable to the average German citizen. The initial concept was developed in 1934 with the goal of creating an inexpensive, reliable car for mass production. Hitler's requirements were simple, and it was that the car could fit 2 adults and 3 children in the back. Such a family man, this guy. It was supposed to be fuel efficient, 60 mile per hour top speed, and a price of around current $400. The prototype and early development of the Beetle. The first prototypes were developed between 1936 and 1938. These early models incorporated key design elements that would become characteristic of the Beetle: the round and aerodynamic shape, the rear engine, air-cooled, torsion bar suspension. The launch of the Beetle was a bit complex. And as a side note, the Beetle originally was called Type 1 Volkswagen. And it was complex because World War II happened. While initial production began in 1938, widespread civilian production was stopped during the war. Mainly, the factory was used to produce military vehicles. And from what I have gathered, only 630 Beetles were produced by the end of the war. So during this whole span, there were barely any Beetles made. Uh, let's look at the challenges that the Beetle affronted more in depth. Some of the challenges that the Beetle encounter, the obvious one, the war. The Volkswagen Wolfsburg factory was taken by the government to produce military vehicles. During the war, the factory was heavily damaged, influencing production post-war. There was initial skepticism about um, the way to produce this car after the war, uh, meaning the car was uneconomic, unattractive, uh, and the last one, and probably one of the biggest ones, the association to the Nazi Party. Definitely not a good PR move there, but I mean, it is what it is. When production was expanded to Mexico in 1960s, other issues arose. Maintaining consistency between the factories, meaning the quality between from factory to factory, proved to be a challenge. And another one that might not be a quality issue, but since the Mexico produced Beetles use a mix of parts from Brazil and parts made in Mexico, these were considered by some people, some enthusiasts, as a lower quality cars. And finally, as mentioned in our GTI episode, when the 70s were reached, the technology of the Beetle was getting a little bit old. After the birth of the Japanese car makers and American compact cars, front wheel drive became very popular and more fuel efficient. Emissions requirements were hard to achieve for the air-cooled engine, and the layout became rather inefficient. From 1970 to 1976, the sales declined by almost 50%. It was a huge hit for Volkswagen. The post-war rebirth, taking a couple steps back, the post-war for the Beetle between 1945 and 1950, the Beetle experienced a remarkable resurrection. A British Army officer named Ivan Hurst played a crucial role in reviving the factory. He arrived at the factory in 1945 and was able to recognize the potential that the factory had in it, transforming the factory back to civilian manufacturing instead of military. He realized that despite the destruction, the factory was still operational. He also discovered a pre-war prototype in a shed nearby, if I'm not mistaken, which also sparked his idea. It made him think about the possibilities of using this factory. Hearst was able to get an order from the British government to produce 20,000 cars at the plant to help with the occupation, meaning while the Allies were trying to occupy Germany, the British government gave him the okay to start producing cars at the Wolfsburg factory. By the end of 1945, 55 Beetles had been produced. The factory was working again. Well, actually, let me take that back. Those 55 cars, I don't know exactly if those were Beetles, but they were definitely Volkswagen cars. The factory was working again. Hearst worked on creating a sustainable model for the brand, created a repair and sales center, a network for the brand basically, arranged for the first exports in 1947 to be sent to the Netherlands. He also exported the possibility of making new models like convertibles. Sorry, he explored the possibility. He didn't export. He explored the possibility of making new models. In 1948, the management of Volkswagen was transitioned back to German hands. And by the time Hearst left in 1949, the handover was made. He left Volkswagen with 8,700 employees and a production of 4,000 vehicles per month. Not too shabby. Global expansion. The Beetle became a symbol of Germany post-war recovery. The first Beetle arrived to the US in 1949, propelling sales in the 50s and 60s. By 1955, Volkswagen was exporting to 18 countries and accounted 50% of German car sales. Huge. Volkswagen was, and without looking at numbers today, I still think they're huge. The same year, the 1 millionth Beetle was manufactured. In 1955, the 1 millionth unit was created of the Beetle. Crazy. On the same year, Volkswagen of America was created, and with it, a network of dealerships in the US. Manufacturing expanded to Mexico. The initial move to Mexico was done through contract manufacturers. In this case, it was Chrysler who started it, which made 250 units that year. The next year, a 6-month contract with the Studebaker Packard was signed. This second deal saw kits being shipped from Germany to Mexico for assembly. And the first assembly facility was created also in 1962, but by 64, Volkswagen of Mexico was born. A second plant in Puebla was born in 1965, rolling its first Beetle in 1967. By 1968, the Beetle was the world's best-selling car. And in 1969, annual production exceeded 1 million units. Insane. By 1972, over 15 million Beetles had been manufactured, surpassing the Model T's record. Crazy stuff. Crazy. By the way, I think I skipped it, but the manufacturing in Mexico started in 1961. Just to be clear, from 61 to 67, the milestones in Mexico, and then we go with the world milestones like the best-selling car in 68. Just to keep track of the timeline. Finally, modern legacy. The last Beetle rolled out of production in 2003. Volkswagen introduced a new Beetle in 1997, which was not horrible. At first glance, I really didn't love it. I mean, the Beetle is a classic, the Super Beetle that they called the first one, born in the 30s. Driving the new Beetle was something else though. I drove an automatic, and it was actually fun to drive. With a manual gearbox, it was probably a blast. This model continued until 2019 when it was discontinued, marking the end of the remarkable Beetle. It was definitely a precursor of other cars like the Porsche 911, the Chevy Corvair, the Mini Cooper, and the Fiat 500, just to mention a few. These cars, I'm not saying they were exactly the same, but they either copied the layout of having a rear mounted engine or chasing the name of people's cars like the Mini Cooper. The Beetle definitely marked a trend. The the Beetle is definitely an icon, and just by having some of that rocky past from being created by Nazi Germany or requested by Adolf Hitler, it's a tough act to follow. But I think the Volkswagen Beetle definitely made history in the automotive industry. Definitely, Volkswagen and Porsche have not been exempt of guilt or challenges to overcome because of these decisions. But at the end of the day, I mean, I'm assuming it has been costly for them, but they were able to bring those brands back up, and now they are where they are. Volkswagen struggling a little bit at the time of this recording, uh, January 22nd, 2025. Porsche, it looks like they're doing good. Same family though, so we'll see how everything pans out for them. The Nazi association is not that touched anymore, but it definitely left a mark on the brands. This is, as you can see, a short episode. Uh, I'm back in school, so the episodes might be shorter. I might have to take breaks in between, but I hope you enjoyed it. Any feedback will be greatly appreciated in the comments of whatever you're listening. I think we're on mostly the big places where you can listen to podcasts. You can head to the website 3lanes.com. I am Danny Lanes. I have been your host, I guess. Thanks for listening. I appreciate your time. Have a great week.